Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, September 14th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today will reach a high of 86.5 degrees Fahrenheit, with temperatures dropping to a low of 64.3 overnight. It's a day that invites us to consider the complex shifts happening in our world. Coming up on Alex's News, we'll first examine why the economic demands recently put forth by President Trump are encountering substantial hurdles, making their implementation a difficult task. Following that, we'll turn our attention to California, investigating the reasons behind the state's decision to boost oil production, even as it strives to meet ambitious climate change objectives. All these compelling stories and more are just ahead on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Ethan, it sounds like President Trump is really turning up the heat on the international stage with some bold proposals. What's the latest?
Grace, it's certainly a fiery set of demands. Just yesterday, September 13th, 2025, former U.S. President Donald Trump issued a high-stakes call for all NATO countries to immediately cease purchasing Russian oil. And if that wasn't enough, his simultaneously threatening the imposition of hefty 50% to 100% tariffs on China for its continued acquisition of Russian petroleum. According to reporting from PBS NewsHour and Euronews, Trump unveiled these demands on his social media platform, Truth Social, even including a letter he purportedly sent to NATO nations.
Wow, quite a double whammy. What exactly is his stated rationale for these drastic measures? He's certainly not shy about making big claims.
He isn't, Grace. Trump asserts these drastic measures are essential to swiftly end the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and to, quote, break, end quote, China's, quote, strong control and even grip over Russia. He views continued Russian oil purchases by NATO as, quote, shocking, end quote, arguing it, quote, greatly weakens, end quote, NATO's negotiating position. His position, as reported by The Hindu, is that he is ready to implement, quote, major sanctions on Russia, end quote, only if all NATO members agree to a complete halt of Russian oil. Interestingly, he's already imposed a 25% import tax on India for its Russian energy purchases, bringing India's total tariff to 50%.
So Hes not just talking, he's already acted on some of these principles. What's the broader context here? Were any specific events that might have prompted these latest pronouncements?
Absolutely, Grace. The timing is quite significant. His proposals emerged amidst a tense period in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Just 4 days ago, on Wednesday, September 10th, 2025, multiple Russian drones reportedly entered Polish airspace, Poland being a NATO ally. Those drones were subsequently shot down by Poland, triggering the activation of Article 4 of the NATO Treaty for Joint Consultations, as PBS NewsHour and Euronews have detailed, while acting U.S. Ambassador Dorothy Shea asserted America, quote, will defend every inch of NATO territory, end quote. Trump controversially downplayed the event, suggesting it, quote, could have been a mistake, end quote, a notion quickly rejected by Polish officials.
That's a serious incident to downplay. But let's dig into the oil angle. Which NATO countries are still in Russia's good graces, so to speak, when it comes to oil purchases? And how significant are those transactions?
Well, Grace, despite the ongoing conflict, several NATO members are indeed still purchasing Russian oil. According to Euronews, Turkey is identified as the third largest buyer of Russian oil after China and India, with substantial imports totaling billions of US dollars in mineral fuels from Russia in 2024. Hungary remains highly reliant, being the largest EU importer of Russian fossil fuels in July 2025, and Slovakia also maintains significant dependency, with Russian crude via the Druzhba pipeline accounting for a high percentage of its fossil fuel imports.
Those are substantial figures. It seems like cutting off Russian oil would be quite the uphill battle for some. What has been the initial international reaction to these very ambitious proposals?
Initial official international reactions have been somewhat limited, Grace, likely due to the recency of the statements. However, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi did respond today, September 14, 2025, to the calls for tariffs by stating that, quote, China does not participate in wars or plot them, end quote, and that, quote, war cannot solve problems, and sanctions only complicate them, end quote. This is according to various sources, including the Hindustan Times and SCMP. Notably, there haven't been widely reported official reactions yet from specific NATO members like Turkey, Hungary, or Slovakia, who, as we discussed, have significant dependencies.
It sounds like China is already putting up a diplomatic wall. What about the broader economic and diplomatic consequences? Experts must be weighing in on what might happen if these tariffs and oil bans were actually implemented.
Indeed, Grace, the expert consensus, as documented by sources like TaxMe, NDTV, and Forbes, is that such a move would likely trigger severe unintended consequences. On the economic front, an immediate cessation of Russian oil purchases by all NATO members would be a major supply shock, leading to substantial energy price spikes and global inflation. Steep tariffs on China are widely expected to provoke retaliatory measures, potentially escalating into broader trade wars that destabilize global supply chains. From a diplomatic perspective, these executive tariff actions could create significant friction within alliances and challenge the World Trade Organization. Many experts believe that a full-scale economic confrontation might ironically lead to a closer alignment between Moscow and Beijing, rather than driving a wedge between them.
That's quite a catch-22. And on the legal side, how would something like this even be implemented? Does NATO even have the mandate to enforce such sweeping economic measures?
That's a critical point, Grace. According to sources like NATO.int and Wikipedia, the North Atlantic Treaty primarily establishes NATO as a political and military alliance for collective defense. While Article 2 encourages economic collaboration, it doesn't provide a direct legal mechanism for the alliance to collectively impose economic sanctions or trade embargoes on non-member states. Decisions in NATO are made by consensus, meaning every member must agree. For NATO members also in the European Union, like Hungary and Slovakia, such actions fall under the EU's Common Commercial Policy, which requires unanimous agreement from all 27 member states, as detailed by Europa.eu and Baker McKenzie. So achieving unanimous consent faces immense obstacles due to economic disruption, the lack of a direct NATO mandate, and divergent national interests.
It seems like these proposals would face a very steep climb to implementation, even before considering the potential blowback. One last question for you, Ethan. Trump states that these actions would, quote, break, end quote, China's, quote, strong control, end quote, over Russia. How much leverage does China actually have over Russia in this conflict? Is it truly a master and puppet scenario?
It's a complex relationship, Grace. Far from a simple master and puppet scenario, China does possess significant economic leverage over Russia, especially since the 2022 invasion isolated Moscow from Western markets, making Russia increasingly reliant on China for energy and imports. Some analysts, including those cited by RBC.UA and OSW.WA.place, suggest that if China were to cease its support, the war in Ukraine could indeed end rapidly. However, China's influence isn't absolute. While it reportedly played a role in persuading Moscow not to use nuclear weapons, it has largely refrained from providing lethal weapons to Russia, likely due to concerns about Western admonitions and potential secondary sanctions. Russia, for its part, largely maintains strategic autonomy in its military and foreign policy. China maintains a, quote, pro-Russia neutrality, end quote, balancing its critical economic ties with the West. So it's more of a powerful partnership of convenience, rather than outright control.
Ethan, thank you for really breaking down what sounds like a very rocky road ahead. We appreciate you navigating these turbulent waters for us this morning. That's story 1 of 2.
My pleasure, Grace.
Welcome back to your morning news. Our top story continues. With the seismic shift happening in California's energy landscape, lawmakers and Governor Gavin Newsom have just enacted a sweeping energy overhaul package aimed at tackling everything from wildfires to utility finances and the state's intricate energy future, including oil production. This is a massive, high-stakes legislative effort, and joining me to help us drill down into the details is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, this package is the product of months of intense, often behind closed-doors negotiations. What exactly does this comprehensive set of 6 bills entail?
Grace, it's a monumental, high-stakes undertaking aiming for energy stability, lower consumer costs, and wildfire protection. However, as the Los Angeles Times highlighted, the rushed, behind closed doors nature of negotiations drew significant criticism.
Speaking of wildfires, a central pillar directly addresses that threat. An additional $18 billion is being poured into the state's Wildfire Liability Fund. What is this fund, and why the urgent need for replenishment?
Established by Assembly Bill 1054, the fund shields investor-owned utilities from financial collapse due to equipment-sparked wildfires. According to ABC News, the $18 billion injection is urgent because the fund neared depletion after the January 2025 Eaton fire in Los Angeles County near Southern California Edison equipment.
So, who bears the financial burden of this $18 billion replenishment?
It's split equally. $9 billion comes from electricity ratepayers via a 10-year extension of a monthly surcharge, pushing its expiration to 2045. The remaining $9 billion comes from shareholders of California's three largest investor-owned utilities. They will also contribute $300 million annually from 2029 to 2045, aiming to prevent bankruptcies like PG&E's 2019 filing.
Beyond the Wildfire Fund, the overhaul also aims to mitigate energy costs for millions of Californians. What measures are in place to temper soaring electricity prices?
Consumers will see a significant increase in the climate credit on utility bills, saving hundreds annually. The legislation also bolsters grid reliability and reduces pollution by expanding regional power markets for clean energy sharing, limits utility profits, and provides less costly government financing for wildfire projects.
Now, Chloe, the most scrutinized and perhaps contradictory aspect is the push to boost domestic crude oil production. How can a state with ambitious climate goals also promote more fossil fuel extraction? It seems like a crude awakening for some.
It's a complex balancing act, Grace. Fueling much debate, Senate Bill 237 approves new drilling, rehabilitates an offshore pipeline, and controversially, waives the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, for new oil wells in Kern County. This is driven by economic pressures.
And what are those pressures leading to this shift?
Primarily, impending closures of Valero's Benicia and Phillips 66's Los Angeles area refineries by April 2026, which is just 199 days from today, are projected to cut California's refining capacity by 17 to 20%. Industry experts and state officials, according to reporting, warned this could mean volatile gas prices up to $8.44 per gallon by late 2026 and, quote, supply shortages. Job preservation in oil-dependent Kern County also played a role.
So, by boosting local crude, the idea is to prevent those astronomical gas prices. But how exactly does more in-state crude help gasoline output if refining capacity is the bottleneck?
While not increasing refining capacity directly, it boosts output from remaining refineries. PBF energy facilities, for example, are reportedly dependent on Kern County crude, which is over 70% of the state's oil, needing stable local pipeline supply. In-state crude costs $1 per barrel, far cheaper than importing foreign crude at $4 to $6 per barrel over 40 days. This efficiency aids California's fuel island status and reduces outsourced emissions.
This historic compromise clearly didn't sit well with everyone. What were the key stakeholder arguments, particularly from environmental groups?
The Western States Petroleum Association argued increasing domestic crude was essential to stabilize the market, and they were supportive overall. Labor unions focused on job security. Environmental groups strongly opposed Senate Bill 237, condemning it as a, quote, wrong-headed approach and a, quote, capitulation to big oil. They warned waiving CEQA would increase pollution, calling it a blank check for drilling, according to their public statements.
Beyond the crude oil debate, the cap-and-trade program, now, quote, cap and invest, also saw an extension. What does that mean for California's climate goals?
The Cap and Invest program, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions, was extended through 2045. This continues a key mechanism for regulating industrial emissions, crucial for meeting California's carbon neutrality target. It generates billions for climate efforts. However, the CEQA waiver for oil wells is expected to trigger extensive legal challenges.
And were there any alternatives to boosting in-state crude that were considered?
Yes. Alternatives proposed but not prioritized included increasing refined petroleum product imports, establishing state-level strategic reserves, enhancing market oversight, and accelerating demand reduction strategies like zero-emission vehicles.
Chloe, thank you for providing such a clear and comprehensive look at this complex energy package. It sounds like California's energy future is certainly going to be a fascinating journey.
My pleasure, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. In London, what was billed as a Unite the Kingdom rally seems to have done just the opposite. A far-right demonstration, organized by activist Tommy Robinson, drew a massive crowd, estimated at over 100,000 people, to protest immigration. However, the event was far from a peaceful assembly, descending into violent clashes. Tensions flared when demonstrators, carrying Union Jacks, tried to breach police lines to confront a smaller counter-protest. Projectiles were thrown, and some marchers turned on police, resulting in injuries to 26 officers. At least 25 arrests have been made. The event, which included a virtual address from tech billionaire Elon Musk, has been widely condemned by political figures as, quote, unacceptable violence. Meanwhile, there's something fishy going on in the Caribbean, and it's not just the tuna. Venezuela is accusing the United States Navy of illegally boarding one of its fishing boats. The Venezuelan foreign minister claims the destroyer USS Jason Dunham hostilely boarded the vessel, detaining its 9-man crew for 8 hours. However, a U.S. official says the boarding was based on a drug tip and took place in international waters, with no illicit substances found. This incident is rocking the boat in already troubled waters, following a recent deadly U.S. strike on another Venezuelan vessel and provocative maneuvers by Venezuelan fighter jets near the same U.S. warship. And here in the States, a truly charged situation is unfolding in Georgia. A massive immigration raid at the Hyundai Motor Group's new electric vehicle plant has left hundreds of families in crisis. The raid, the largest of its kind in Homeland Security history, resulted in the detention of 475 workers. While over 300 South Korean nationals were later released and flown home, advocates say many non-Korean workers from Central and South America remain in legal limbo, their families left without their sole breadwinners. Community groups are scrambling to provide essentials like food and baby formula, calling the raids, quote, political theater at the expense of families. In Washington, one Federal Reserve governor has no interest in leaving her post. Lisa Cook is fighting a high-stakes legal battle against the Trump administration's attempt to remove her from the Fed's board. The White House cited allegations of mortgage fraud from before she joined the board, but a lower court judge has temporarily blocked the move, stating the administration lacked sufficient for-cause justification. The case, now in an appeals court, is seen as a critical test of the central bank's independence from political pressure. Governor Cook, who vehemently denies the claims, may be getting a boost, as new loan documents have emerged that appear to undermine the administration's case. Finally, a shaky situation off Russia's Far East coast. A powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake struck under the seabed of the Kamchatka Peninsula today. The shallow quake, located in the seismically active Ring of Fire, briefly triggered a tsunami warning for nearby coastal areas, but that threat has since passed. So far, there have been no reports of significant damage or casualties in the sparsely populated region. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.